This is Special Chronicles, giving respect and a voice to people with special needs.
I shudder thinking how the world can be so cruel. I lend my voice to those who can't. It's time we try, it's time we care, it's time we stand. It starts with a voice.
Welcome to the Special Chronicles show. This is episode 518. My name is Daniel Smrokowski, and I'm the founder of Special Chronicles and a Special Olympics Southern Tribal International Global Messenger. Our website, specialchronicles.com, where you can stream our archives of over 730 episodes absolutely for free. And to follow Special Chronicles on social media, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or anywhere you listen to podcasts, and find our original series, award-winning columns, blogs, and sign up for our newsletter. This week on the Special Chronicles show, we welcome Melissa Hart, author of the new novel, Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. Melissa's Hart is focused on kids and parents with a particular interest in marginalized communities. Melissa lives in Eugene, Oregon with her husband and her teen daughter. She grew up in Southern California with her brother who has Down syndrome and spent a decade working as a special education teacher. She teaches for the MFA program in creative writing at Southern New Hampshire University with a focus on YA literature. Daisy Woodworm Changes the World is her second novel. Please put your virtual hands together as we welcome Melissa on the Special Chronicles podcast on specialchronicles.com. Welcome, Melissa.
Daniel, thank you so much. I am just thrilled to be here, and go Special Olympics.
Yes, speaking of Special Olympics, that's how we got connected. The senior, so at Special Olympics International, the senior vice president of global youth and education, Jacqueline Jadot, Dr. Jackie, if she's listening, that's how we got connected, because we were on a call and she had, I think she wrote a one of the blurbs about your book.
Yeah, she did. It's right there on the back.
Yeah, and so why don't we begin, because there's a lot that we're going to talk about your book, and hopefully this episode will encourage all of our listeners to pick up your book. We'll put links in the show notes to Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and all those places. But share with us your connected. I read your bio, but share with us from in your own words your connection to our disability community with your brother. And
Yeah. So as you said, I grew up in Southern California, and my younger brother was born with Down syndrome. And my mother just inherently understood the importance of full inclusion. And so even though back then when my brother was born, pediatricians said, "Oh, you'll probably just want to put him in an institution," she said, "over my dead body." And she made sure to get him very early intervention in terms of therapy and education. And so I just grew up with him, and he was my pesky little brother, and we were best friends as we were growing up, and we talk every day on the phone now. So that's my connection. And then after I graduated from college, I started teaching special education, specifically in third grade, and also worked as a job coach, and worked for a time in several group homes with intellectually and physically disabled adults.
Awesome. You had said that your brother is older than you, or
No, he's younger. He's 5 years younger.
Another year. Okay, that's right. Because I was reading the synopsis and a little bit of your book, the one of the lead characters, it's her older brother. So I had that. So I had the fiction novel in my mind, but I guess that's a good way to kind of kick off the conversation. But first, I thought, and I'm gonna pull. Well, I'm gonna pull in. I'm gonna pull in Jackie's back cover below later on, but I want to let our listeners know that. So throughout this conversation, we're gonna we'll, after our break, we'll give our listeners a synopsis of the novel, and then get into some of the themes, and then at the end, some final thoughts at the end of the episode. But we'll go ahead and take a short break to let our listeners know how they can support this podcast, because it's, as you know, it's free to listen, but it does cost money for all the technology and all the other costs that goes into producing a podcast. So our guest is Melissa Hart, author of Daisy Woodworm Changes the World, and we'll be back right here on Special Chronicles this short break. Support for Special Chronicles comes from listeners like you. As an independent public media podcast, Special Chronicles will always be there for you. Now we're asking you to be there for us. As a nonprofit independent media organization, we can only make programs like Special Chronicles with listener support. Our programs provide weekly, candid, honest, and inspiring conversations about the people with this each week's episode. Listeners tell us our shows are an enjoyable and necessary podcast for the intellectual and developmental disability community and everyone else who is able to listen to stories about life from a different angle. Please, if you and your family love our weekly podcasts, make a one-time, monthly, or annual gift of thanks today. Support this podcast at specialchronicles.com/give. That's specialchronicles.com/give. And we are back. So we're gonna dive into the book, and I forgot to mention in the introduction, I had it right at the top of the show notes. But this episode, we're pre-recording this at the end of February, but this episode is going to air on March, the 20th of March, and as I'm sure you know, probably a lot of our listeners. Maybe not all the listeners might not know, but a lot of some of our listeners may know that March 21st is World Down Syndrome Day, and so it's kind of perfect timing with this novel kind of featuring a character with Down syndrome, and so we'll dive in and. Before we get into the synopsis, going to take us back to how you got started with this novel, because this is your second novel. And so to talk to us about how you got started and a little bit about the inspiration for the book and why you wanted to write this novel.
Yeah, when I was growing up, when my brother and I were kids, we never found any novels for kids featuring a main character with an intellectual or developmental disability. They just didn't exist. And so I really wanted to write those characters as main characters. When I decided to start writing for middle school audiences, my first book was Avenging the Owl, and it's got a main character who has Down syndrome. Eric is the character and absolutely adores Oregon flora and fauna and insects, and knows everything there is to know about insects. And I wanted this character to be empowered and just really, really smart. And I had such a good time with that character that when I wrote my second book, I knew I wanted to make the secondary main character a person with Down syndrome based on my brother as well. I think it was about 3 years ago, maybe 5 years ago, our chapter of Special Olympics could not hold their summer games because of lack of funds. And my brother has always lived for Special Olympics. It's his whole world. He does every sport they'll let him do. And so I was thinking about what that meant for all of these athletes in Oregon who train all year for summer games and how they weren't going to have these games. And so when I wrote Daisy Woodworm Changes the World, there it is. I wanted to write about this main character who has Down syndrome and what his life became like on the day that two devastating things happened to him. His name is Sorrel, and he's at a Special Olympics dance, a really fancy dress-up ball, and his longtime girlfriend leaves him for his best friend. And that same day, he hears that the summer games have been canceled. And so his younger sister, Daisy, gets a school assignment to change the world. She sees how depressed her brother is, and she decides to help him fulfill his dream of becoming a YouTube fashion celebrity. But the problem is, their parents have forbidden him to appear on social media because they're terrified of bullies.
Awesome. Well, there's a bunch that I made a few notes that we'll kind of dive in, and I'm sure this will encourage our listeners to pick up the novel. That for those of you just listening to the audio podcast, go check out the video on YouTube, Facebook, or LinkedIn, and just go to the show notes, specialchronicles.com. /podcast 518, and we'll put a link to the video, the full video episode, and you can see the book, or it should be the image for this episode. But I made a few comments that I thought we could kind of talk through. In the first, so the 13-year-old lead character's name is Daisy, and then her older brother has Down syndrome. So is this and before we get into some of the other notes, is it with one in track and the character Daisy's brother dreams of becoming a YouTube celebrity? Is any of this, because this is a fiction novel, so is any of this based on your real life with your brother, or is it kind of based on a combination of you and your brother and other Special Olympics athletes and siblings?
You are so smart to ask that. Yes. Let's see, where do I start? First of all, my brother has always been impeccably dressed. He just has an incredible sense of fashion. He has had a subscription to GQ for decades. He's always the best dressed man in the room. He just, I don't know why I didn't get that gene, but I did not. I did get the running gene, however. So all of Daisy's adventures as a middle school track star are based on my own childhood as a competitive runner. I ran mostly in high school, and I actually still run half marathons today. But my brother is on Special Olympics track and field as well, and has been for decades. And so when I used to volunteer with his team, I would hang out with him and his friends, and I did pull different characters out of his friendship circle to sort of incorporate into the book. I would take a piece of this one, and I would take a characteristic of that one. And so really use that experience as, helping with his Special Olympics teams to integrate these characters authentically into the book.
Awesome. moving on, as you, I'm not going to read the synopsis because our listeners can probably go on Amazon or Barnes Noble and read it for themselves. But I want to just briefly mention that, and we'll remind our listeners at the end of the episode where they can go buy the book. But it's the best place to direct our listeners to your website, melissahart.com, and then from there they can find links to buy the book.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, you can buy it anywhere. It's available at online and brick and mortar bookstores all over, and at libraries all over as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I'll have to stop in my local library and see if they have the book, or even give the library a link to this episode, so our community can listen and hopefully go and pick up the book. But so the main character, Daisy's class bully calls her Woodward, making fun of her lisp. And so for myself with a severe language disorder as one of the disabilities that I was diagnosed with, I know that myself and probably your brother and a lot of other people can relate to that. And so even though the lead character doesn't have a disability, but I think you hear a lot in a disability community that people talk about that everybody has some type of disability. My dad talks about having strengths and weaknesses. And so I think that even though, the lead character, even though her brother has Down syndrome, there's still a challenge that she struggles with.
Right.
Is that, can we talk a little bit about
Yeah, I grew up with a lisp. I still lapse into it, especially if I've been teaching a class for several hours. I teach for different writing conferences and other conferences, and so it'll come out. And I wasn't bullied for that in particular, but my brother was. And so I thought it was really important to show readers just how much a classroom bully can disturb the atmosphere of a room, can take what is supposed to be a safe and supportive space and make it torture for people. And so hopefully I showed that with this bully in Daisy's classroom. She grows up full of ideas and full of plans and passions, but she's terrified to open her mouth because she's so frightened that people will make fun of her.
Awesome. Well, not to jump ahead to the next segment, but I'm sure that this can be a theme or a lesson that through this fiction novel that readers can learn from the example of this story and hopefully change the world in their schools, in their communities, maybe even their inclusive workplaces.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure, yes, this novel is geared to middle school students, but I'm sure you could even probably apply it to in communities, to inclusive workplaces, that there's probably even bullies in those places as well. And so I'm sure this novel can, and that's why we'll be encouraging all listeners that this novel is not just for middle school, but it's for anybody.
That is absolutely accurate. I can't tell you how many adults have reached out to me and said, thank you for this book. I adored it. I'm recommending it to everybody just because of what you're talking about. Bullying is pervasive. It doesn't stop in school.
Awesome. I want to quickly circle back to something that I have in the first segment, and I'm just now remembering it, but and then I'll also go back to the synopsis. But one of the books, and I still have it in not in my studio here, but in the other room down the hall, some books that I've had from since I was really little, and one book is called Radiance Descending, and it features a character with Down syndrome. But I think like in the book they don't. I think they refer to it as like Downs or something like that, like kind of in a abbreviate, like not like I guess not the correct language to
Mm.
use. And so I remember that I think that was like one of the first novels that I remember reading from my younger years. The author I think is Paula Fox. I want to believe I'm blanking on
Huh.
the author, but yeah, the book is called Radiance Descendant. It's a really small. I didn't have time. I just thought I just made the note now, so I didn't have time to grab it off my bookshelf. But it's a very small novel.
Oh.
Like it's even smaller than the one that you wrote. But it's So that I just thought of that. And now, kind of circling back to the synopsis. So speaking of this lesson, this theme of bullying, the hateful comments from a cyber bully is what the lead character in your novel deals with. And so my girlfriend Georgia has Down syndrome. I've got a bunch of pictures of her on my desk here, and actually even in a couple of my other rooms. And so also competes in Special Olympics as well. She has a twin sister who doesn't have a disability. But one of the things is, even before we started dating, when we just met, one of the, I guess, because we were involved in the athlete leadership program in our Special Olympics program in Illinois. And one of the things that when I guess piqued my interest about her, even before we started dating, was hearing her story. And actually, she was actually the first, since I've been podcasting for 15 years, probably the first person with Down syndrome to actually co-host on my podcast. Maybe even of all the millions of podcasts out there, maybe even as well. I haven't done a lot of research on that, but
Wow.
I guess kind of going back to her story, she in her early years, and she doesn't talk about this a lot now. We even, in addition to this weekly podcast, we host a podcast called the Georgia and Daniel Show. That's also on the Special Chronicles Network. And so she was in her early years. She was bullied, and I believe maybe also cyberbullied. I don't know that much part of that story, but I mean, even myself in my younger years as well, like I would come home from my early elementary school years in tears, and even a little bit even in high school, which is, I think it's been 15 years since I graduated from high school, but when I had a lot more hair. But it's, I think, and it probably speaks to what you wrote about in this novel, that whether my girlfriend Georgia or myself, I think people just don't understand all challenges, and it's probably the same thing for your brother, and probably the same thing for the character's brother in this novel.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to comment on any of that.
I just hope that my novel illuminates how much people with intellectual and developmental disabilities are bullied, both in person and online, and how to stand up for each other and how to be an ally, and how that doesn't stop in school. I am so glad that you mentioned the fact that people still get bullied in the workplace.
Yeah.
I mean, be that coworker who is an ally and stands up for change and extends a hand in friendship. I really hope that the book illuminates the challenges and what you can do to be an ally.
Absolutely. And moving on, I love the title of the episode, Daisy Woodworm Changes the World, and I think that kind of speaks into the next part of the story, because you set up the novel with kind of introducing the characters and then getting into the conflict. In my early middle school years, I wrote a lot of fiction stories, and then I kind of moved over to the more. I have a degree in journalism, so kind of more into the nonfiction and journalism stories. But from introducing the characters to moving on to the conflict, now kind of moving into the I guess moving out of the conflict, that if Daisy had any hopes of changing the world, she had to, you talk about having to regain her family's trust, face her fears of public speaking, which I think public speaking is one of like the biggest, I think probably one of the number one or two fears for anybody. No matter if you have a disability or not.
Yeah.
And then she faces her fears of public speaking to find her unique and powerful voice. So I guess before I have you comment on that, I recently gave a keynote talk in Jefferson City, Missouri last fall. And the whole theme of that was, the whole theme of that keynote talk episode. I've been including a link to if a listener knows, and I can share with you as well if you want to watch or listen to that talk. Yeah. But I think that talk that I gave kind of speaks to what you wrote about moving out of the Boeing, kind of from challenges to opportunity, and in that you're taking a challenge, which in this case in the novel is being bullied, and you find an opportunity, or you're changing the world.
Yeah.
Find opportunity to overcome public speaking, to overcome the bullying. And so I'm sure, do you want to maybe kind of comment on that? Because there's a lot that can learn from really.
Yeah. What I'd love to say is that Daisy's older brother, Sorrel, has already found his unique and powerful voice. He loves fashion. He loves Special Olympics. He adores his friends. He's excited to go to college. He's not afraid of public speaking at all. He wants to be out there on YouTube, on social media, telling the world what he knows and what he believes in. He really inspires his sister to overcome her own fear of public speaking because of her lisp and take a chance. I won't give anybody any spoilers, but it's really him. It's really her brother who inspires her to find her own unique and powerful voice. And I thought that was really important. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we're going to go ahead and take another short break to mention a couple of our corporate partners for this podcast. And when we come back, we'll continue talking about the themes. And I guess what I kind of found was a key theme of this novel. And so our guest is Melissa Hart, author of Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. And we'll be back to continue talking about some of the themes from this novel that is for any readers, no matter if it's a young reader or an adult reader. And so we'll be back after this short audio clip to play. We'll be right back. Support for Special Chronicles comes from ComEd. Special Chronicles is proud to ambassador. The Energy Force is the country's first energy efficiency education program designed for and taught by people with disabilities. ComEd is powering lives, and Wary is powering us here at Special Chronicles to keep the lights on and our technology is powered on. As ComEd powers the lives of us, they are literally giving a voice to people with special needs. We thank ComEd for the generous support of our mission at Special Chronicles. Learn more at specialchronicles.com/ComEd. That's specialchronicles.com/ComEd. Support for Special Chronicles comes from United Airlines Bridge Disability Business Resource Group. Special Chronicles is proud to partner with United Airlines and the Bridge BLG. Bridge BLG is committed to being an ally for all employees and customers with disabilities. Bridge helps to create internal awareness to keep accessibility needs in mind and partner with key organizations to empower disability inclusion for employment and travel. Bridge, connecting people of all abilities. Book your travel today on United.com or on the award-winning United app. Learn more on United's commitment to disability inclusion for employment and travel at specialchronicles.com/United. That's specialchronicles.com/United. Love having that background music for the
Fantastic.
for the sponsor break. Just to kind of add a little funness. I don't think funness is a word, but
I think you just made it one.
one, yeah. And so moving on, kind of, and I think in this third segment we can kind of talk about what the overall theme for the novel, and I think what we concluded the synopsis was kind of leads into that. Before I get to one of the highlighted notes, what I think is the theme. Before we get to that, I want you to maybe talk a little bit about why storytelling changes the world. I think we highlighted a little bit in the last segment, so our viewers know. But you want to maybe talk a little bit about why? Because that's going to be part of the title of this episode, and I think it speaks a lot to what our listeners and what your readers can learn from this novel. But why does storytelling, in particular fiction storytelling, as we're talking about, as opposed to journalism, but why does storytelling and I guess it can apply to either journalism or fiction, but yeah, we can apply to both. So why does storytelling change the world?
I love that question so much. So about 5 years ago, I wrote a nonfiction book called Better with Books, 500 diverse books to ignite empathy and encourage self-acceptance in tweens and teens. You can buy that anywhere and get it at libraries as well. As part of my research for that book, I looked into the studies that had been done on reading fiction, the correlation between reading novels and increased empathy, increased compassion for both ourselves and the people around us. I found that reading for pleasure decreases our anxiety and depression, even if we just read 8 minutes a day. And so when you take both of those research findings, I just feel like giving readers characters that represent every type of person in the world is such a gift. When readers come across a character with Down syndrome or another intellectual or developmental or physical disability, and they can explore this character in the context of a great story, they are building their understanding of this entire demographic. They're building compassion, they're building empathy. And in the case of this book, hopefully they're understanding how they can be more inclusive and how they can have a greater diversity of friends around them.
Awesome. Speaking of that inclusive, that the readers can find, that speaks directly to what I found to be the theme of this novel, and all of you commented and on as well. But as the lead character, Daisy explains, if you want to change the world, cross-pollination is key. And I think if you were to kind of, for maybe for some younger readers, not that much for my age or older, but that word cross-pollination might be a big word for some younger readers to understand. But I think if we were to kind of break that down, or I guess even substitute that word cross-pollination to mean inclusion, I don't know if that's kind of where you will get in with that. But
Yep.
if you want, and I think that's kind of probably the main theme of this novel, that our listeners, that readers, when they read the novel, that they can learn from these characters in this particular novel, is if you want to change the world, inclusion is key.
Yeah.
Cross-pollination is key.
Yeah.
There's a previous in the beginning of January, middle of January, I had an episode with a Special Olympics basketball coach that the title of that episode, because I got it from looking on her Instagram. She was wearing a T-shirt that said "Inclusion everywhere, please," and I think that also kind of speaks to this. But do you want to maybe kind of comment on that, and kind of what's the lesson here that the lead character Daisy is teaching the readers, that cross-pollination, or in other words, inclusion, is that you want to maybe kind of comment on how that's related?
Yeah, there are several scenes near the end of the book, because it turns out that Daisy takes on this project to help her brother become a YouTube fashion influencer, but she also gets roped into her friend's project to save the Special Olympics Summer Games. And so there are several scenes in the latter part of the book that show many of the Special Olympians working together with Daisy and her friends to raise money for Summer Games, to raise awareness for and there's one scene in which the Special Olympians they're actually filming a commercial, and this is based on my own brother, who with his Special Olympics track and field team years ago filmed a commercial for a cell phone company. And so, the middle schoolers are there volunteering and kind of helping to make sure that the people on Special Olympics have enough water, have enough Gatorade, have everything they need as they're filming this commercial. That is what I hope people take away. This is what inclusion looks like. It looks like everybody coming together to work on a common project and succeeding. And so I hope that's what people get from this book.
Awesome. And I love how you highlighted that in the final scenes of this novel, because and even kind of going into what our Special Olympics movement is about, that you had spoke to that in this novel, that when our volunteers, when our coaches, when us athletes, when the sponsors, when the staff, when everybody in this movement, in this family, in the family of Special Olympics come together, that's what the inclusion revolution is all about. The week before this episode airs will be in of the March 1st, will be all about the March 1st to Inclusion Day of Activation. The whole. Oh, hold on. I think there might be a graphic that might be coming up. So we'll try to get rid of that graphic. Clicking that graphic a little bit too soon. Not yet. We'll get to that. But I think what it speaks to. So the theme for this year's Spread the Word to Inclusion is, this 2023 theme is going all in inclusive. And when I think you highlight that in the final scenes of this novel, and I think what our listeners, what the readers can learn is, when you go all in for inclusive, it takes a family. It takes the family of Special Olympics, of everyone coming together to make inclusion happen.
Yeah.
And so I love that you highlighted that. Since that graphic might have, the audio listeners have no idea what we're talking about, because that's what you get by watching the full video episode on our YouTube, specialchronicles.com, to find links to our YouTube or Facebook or LinkedIn, and you can watch. Well, we'll take one final sponsor break. When we come back, we will get to some final thoughts as we wrap up. To purchase the book. Our guest is Melissa Hart, author of Daisy Woodworm Changes the World, that we highly recommend to our listeners. We'll include links on all social media for Special Chronicles, as well as in the show notes to this book. But again, specialchronicles.com, episode 518, to find the show notes. But we'll be back with Melissa Hart with some final thoughts. And that final question is all coming up after this final break right here on specialchronicles.com. Special Chronicles is hosted by Podbean Podcast Hosting, the easiest, most affordable option to get started in podcasting. At Special Chronicles, we proudly host our weekly podcast with Podbean, and highly recommend you use Podbean Podcast Hosting to get started in podcasting today. Limited hosting plan and get 1 month free now to get started in podcasting today when you visit specialchronicles.com/Podbean. That's specialchronicles.com/Podbean. Our live streams are powered by StreamYard, the easiest way to create professional live streams. StreamYard is a live streaming studio in your browser. Interview guests, share your screen, and much more. Stream directly to Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn, and other platforms. Sign up for StreamYard today using our StreamYard referral link when you visit specialchronicles.com/StreamYard. That's specialchronicles.com/StreamYard. And somehow I should have, if I would have done a little bit more editing, I would have faded that out a little bit more better, but it's all good. So I'm sure that there could be a lot more that we could talk about, but I think we gave a good introduction, a good synopsis. I had even the public show notes, so listeners are only going to see a very brief description, but in the show notes that I shared with you, and I think you even said one of the first podcast hosts to give you to give you the show notes, and I had actually copied the synopsis that you had sent me from your website, and so there's a bunch of highlighted notes on there, and that's just for my, even in the post production of this, I'm going to use a lot of those highlighted notes that will go for this episode. But you want to share with our listeners where they can order Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. I think I saw on your website that IndieBound, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Goodreads, the local library, bookstores. But you want to show those listeners how they can first off buy this novel, Daisy Woodworm Changes the World, but then also how to connect with you on your website, social media. I think I saw that you offer some writing classes, I think, or maybe kind of share some of those?
Yeah, sure. Again, you can buy Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. Let's look at that beautiful cover one more time. Elena Bia out of
Let
Italy
me
did that. You can buy it anywhere. You can buy it
let
at
me
all.
spotlight you again to show the viewers the novel again. Since
What's that?
since I spotlighted you full screen, I was going to have you show the
Oh, yeah,
viewers.
sure.
So
Yes.
that's what the novel looks like. Is that speaking of on the cover? Is that a special Olympics medal? I was trying to look a little closely. It looks
It is supposed to
similar,
be
or did you kind of make it?
as similar as we could make it without infringing on Special Olympics copyright. Absolutely. So you can buy it anywhere. It's available online all over the world in bookstores. You can order it if your bookstore doesn't carry it yet. You can order it from your library. It's everywhere. Yeah, and you can find me at melissahart.com.
Awesome.
And yes, I do. I teach writing classes. I'm a consultant for people who might want to write their own stories. I also work as a journalist and write quite a bit about people with intellectual and developmental disabilities for places like the Washington Post and the New York Times and other places. So I'm always happy to help other writers to use their voice to get that message of inclusivity out there.
Awesome. I love that. I'm in the process of writing of finishing writing one book and co-writing a book with a colleague at United, but then also for about, I would say, maybe 4 or 5 years. So like from like 2014 to like 2018, I wrote a monthly column in a local newspaper on our special needs issues.
Wow.
And that kind of came about first being just a freelance reporter and covering as, just local town news. And then I ended up, I went to college with my editor. And so I ended up just talking. It was funny. So I knew him in person in college, but I never, because I was a freelance journalist, I never actually went into the I never went into the newsroom, so I only talked to him on the phone. And so this column, it was called Special Voices, and so it kind of came about because of just talking to my editor on the phone, and it in a way it was an extension of this podcast, and so so I love the whole idea of being able to share our voices and talk about the power of inclusivity, the power of inclusion, the power of cross-pollination, of the inclusion revolution that I just hosted a panel on a global webinar with Special Olympics this morning, and Mary Davis, who is our CEO, she had talked about that the inclusion revolution is the best revolution, the best revolution that we have. Yeah. And I'm sure that you agree that this novel absolutely highlights that, and I'm sure the readers can learn a lot. And so I'll put links in the show notes to your website and to where people can purchase the book.
Thank you.
Or again, just hopefully our listeners will go to the library, will even either the public library, school library, to recommend the book in those schools and communities. But before we get to that final question, do you have any final thoughts on your overall time here today on the Special Chronicles show?
I feel like you're talking about the inclusion revolution, which I had never heard before. And I think you're right. I'm seeing some pretty wonderful things happening in the world. I'm seeing people with intellectual and developmental and physical disabilities much more represented in TV, in movies, on runways, as entrepreneurs, in the art world. And I just think it's really exciting. And I just want to thank you for having this podcast, for making this one more empowering resource that's available to all of us. I'm really grateful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really, the past 15 years, it's really empowering to both share my story, but then also the stories of the guests that I have on. This podcast, just briefly, it started with just me sharing my story, and has evolved into conversations and sharing the stories of others, like you with your novel, and my fellow Special Olympics athletes. And so, speaking of the inclusion revolution, to introduce that final question, we've got a brief bumble that will introduce and tell you and all of our listeners all about the inclusion revolution. So let's go ahead and roll that bumper.
We're not just athletes.
We are the ambassadors of an uprising.
Peaceful protesters.
In a rebellion against anyone
who has a fear of difference.
Difference.
Our demands are
equality.
Dignity.
Passion of our
We will not stop or accept anything less.
Today, our world is
more divided than ever.
And coming together has never been more urgent.
The revolution is inclusion. Find out more at jointherevolution.org.
Oh, that gave me goosebumps.
I will sense. Thanks. Special Olympics a few years ago, I put out that PSA, and so ever since this final question that ever since I attended the 2019 Special Olympics World Games in Abu Dhabi, I've been asking all of our guests one final question, and so I'll do the same with you. As you know, inclusion and the inclusion revolution is a big message in our Special Olympics movement, as you just heard on the PSA. And even inclusion is important here at Special Chronicles. And so, because my producer is a mother of her oldest daughter has Williams syndrome. My business manager is my dad, and so it's inclusion is important. So I'll conclude and ask you the final question as well, and that is, what does inclusion mean to you?
I love that. It means what I was lucky enough to experience when I was growing up, and what I put into the book. It means parties. It means fundraising events. It means classrooms and sporting events where everybody is included, whether they're neurotypical or neurodivergent, whether they have a physical disability, an intellectual or developmental disability, whether they're adopted, whether they're from foster care, different ethnicities and races and religions. Everybody is welcome. Everybody feels safe. Everybody feels supported. That's what it means to me.
Awesome. Well, that's a perfect way to wrap up this episode. I love it's fascinating that all of our guests have different ways that they define inclusion. But I have to say, the way that you define inclusion is something that I hope our listeners can really take with them. Yeah. And that's why we conclude the episodes with that final question, because I'm sure all listeners will take that with them and find a way to change the world. Even if our listeners, I think, don't might not write a novel or might not write a story, but they can. Even if it's storytelling, whether it's on a podcast or whether it's just having a conversation, like not a recorded conversation like we're having now, but like just talking with their friends or family at a coffee shop or just even their neighbor. That type of storytelling, I believe, can. Well, I should say, I know firsthand that storytelling can change the world.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you. Thank you for coming on this podcast, and want to remind our listeners that our website, specialchronicles.com, where you can stream archives of over 730 episodes, absolutely for free, and for links to follow Special Chronicles on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube. Follow Special Chronicles on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere that you listen to podcasts. Just follow and share this episode with your friends. And thanks again. Our guest has been Melissa Hart, author of Daisy Woodworm Changes the World. And we'll be back next week with the managing director of United Airlines Denver Hub, and more content every Monday, 6 p.m. Central, right here on specialchronicles.com. We'll see you next week. And until then, remember, choose to include. See you next week. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Special Chronicles Podcast. Our podcast was produced by Daniel Smrokowski on the Special Chronicles Network. Follow Special Chronicles on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Subscribe, rate, and review Special Chronicles on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Our website, specialchronicles.com, where you can stream our archives of over 500 episodes for free. Also, there's a list of our favorites, original series, award-winning columns, and blogs. And sign up for our newsletter to receive exclusive bonus content delivered to your inbox. Again, Special Chronicles.com. Special Chronicles is hosted by Podbean Podcast Hosting. Our live streams are powered by StreamYard. Thanks, as always, to our business manager, Adam Smrokowski, who always encourages us to never give up. I'm Daniel Smrokowski. Back next week with more stories.
Special Chronicles, giving respect and a voice to people with special needs.